You've probably heard that revolvers never fail, but that's not just wrong. It's dangerous. What's up, everyone? This is Sully from Line 45, and today we're taking a hard look at the real reasons revolvers can, and do, fail when you least expect it. Before I start, I would really appreciate it if you would push those buttons below. The subscribe button, the notification bell, all of them. This is not necessary, but those little clicks help a brother out. Plus, it pushes me to give you more valuable car-related content on your screen. Now buckle up and let's get back to the video. For decades, revolvers have had this almost mythic reputation for being completely foolproof. Just load it, close the cylinder, and pull the trigger. No stovepipes, no FTFs, no malfunctions, right? The truth is, while revolvers are more resistant to common failures you'd see in semi-autos, they're far from immune. I've seen law enforcement revolvers seize up from unburnt powder under the ejector star, and I've watched a .357 jam mid-drill at the range because of bullet creep. Even in self-defense situations, revolvers have failed because of timing issues or proud primers. The bottom line is that no gun is perfect, not even your six-shooter. But of course, this doesn't just happen out of thin air. Cause number one, bullet creep. I learned about bullet creep the hard way out on the range with my S&W 642 running a few cylinders of plus P38 special just to verify my carry ammo. Everything was going smooth until the fifth round wouldn't fire. At first I thought it was a light strike, but the cylinder wouldn't rotate. Locked up tight. Turns out one of the bullets had crept forward just enough to jam against the forcing cone. That's when I realized bullet creep isn't just some reloader's problem. It's real, and it can shut your revolver down when you need it most. So here's what's really going on. Bullet creep or bullet pull happens when recoil causes the bullet to shift forward out of the casing. In a revolver, each round sits exposed in the cylinder and takes full recoil from every shot. If the bullet isn't properly crimped into the case, or if the brass has poor neck tension, it can walk forward. Do that enough times, and eventually one bullet extends just far enough to prevent the cylinder from turning. Game over. This problem shows up the most in ultralight snubbies like scandium frame revolvers from Smith & Wesson Airlight line. They kick like mules, and that sharp recoil is the perfect recipe for bullet creep. The lighter the gun and the hotter the load, the worse the risk. I've seen it happen with .357s and even with some bulk .38s that weren't crimped properly. What's the fix? It's actually easy. Test your ammo. I always run this drill load, 5 shoot, 4, and inspect the 5th. If the bullet has shifted even a little, that load's a no-go for carry. Stick with premium defensive rounds like Horn 80, Critical Defense Spear, Gold Dot Short Barrel, or Federal HST Micro. All are known for tight crimps and good consistency under recoil. So yeah, revolvers are tough, but they're not invincible. And bullet creep is one of those sneaky failures you won't catch until it's too late. But of course, that's not the only issue that messes up with revolvers. I mean, even the best ammo can still mess you up if you're not paying attention right. Cause number 2, high primer. There was this time I ran a GP100 with some bargain reloads and noticed something wasn't right by the 4th trigger pull. The action felt sluggish, and the cylinder didn't want to rotate cleanly. It wasn't a mechanical failure. It was a high primer causing just enough drag between the case head and recoil shield to slow everything down. That tiny bit of primer sticking out is all it took to jam up a rock-solid revolver mid-run. High primers, or proud primers, happen when the primer isn't fully seated into the case. It might only be a hair above flush, but in a revolver that's all it takes. When the cylinder rotates, the case head passes close to the frame's recoil shield. A high primer can hit that surface and either slow the rotation or stop it altogether. Worse, in double action, the added resistance can throw off your rhythm or make the trigger pull feel heavy and inconsistent. This is mostly an issue with hand loads or low-cost remanufactured ammo where the primer pocket might be loose or improperly prepped. That said, even factory training ammo isn't immune. I've caught high primers in bulk .38 special before. It's rare, but not impossible. Before I load anything into a revolver, now I do a quick spin check. Load 5 or 6, close the cylinder, and slowly rotate it by hand. If there's any resistance, I backtrack and check each round for primer height. It's a simple step, but it prevents a lot of headache, especially if you're running drills or using your revolver for serious defense. High primers don't get much attention, but they're a silent killer when it comes to revolver reliability. So yeah, that's wrapped up. Now we're looking at another cause of failure on wheel guns that hides in plain sight. Cause number 3. Debris under the ejector star. If you shoot revolvers enough, especially double action, you'll eventually run into this. The cylinder starts dragging or the trigger gets sticky after a reload. You might think something internal broke, but more often than not, it's just a little piece of carbon or brass shaving lodged under the ejector star. I've had this happen with both my Smith & Wesson Model 66 and my Ruger SP101, and it'll make a smooth-running revolver feel like it's full of sand. Doesn't matter how nice the gun is, if that star doesn't sit flush, the whole gun can lock up. Here's what's really happening. The ejector star, also called the extractor, is the piece that lifts the spent casings when you hit the ejector rod. It's spring-loaded and needs to sit perfectly flush with the back of the cylinder when closed. But even a tiny flake of powder or a small bit of gunk under there can throw it off just enough to cause a failure. The cylinder won't fully lock, and depending on the model, the trigger or hammer might completely freeze up, or you might get a partial turn before everything binds. This is way more common after long-range days or when shooting low-quality ammo. I once ran through a couple of boxes of dirty bulk .38 special, and sure enough, my last reload started acting up. It felt like the gun was breaking, but all it took was a bit of powder fouling tucked under the star. Now, anytime I'm done shooting a revolver, I pop the cylinder out, lift the ejector star and give it a quick brush underneath with a nylon brush or a clean rag. If I'm carrying the gun, I'll do this even more often. Compressed air or a toothbrush works in a pinch too. This isn't some rare failure. It happens to new shooters, seasoned revolver folks, and even cops during quals. The fix is easy, but it only works if you know how to look for it. Now we're going into the dumpster fire territory. When that cylinder's not lining up with the barrel as it should, you're not just risking a malfunction. You could be shaving lead or damaging your forcing cone without even knowing it. Cause number 4. Timing issues. I've handled my fair share of revolvers, from classic Colts to modern Smith & Wessons. And if there's one issue that doesn't care how expensive or well-made your gun is, it's timing problems. I picked up an older S&W Model 10 at a gun show a few years ago, and everything looked clean on the surface. But when I slow-cocked the hammer in single action, the cylinder would just barely finish rotating before the hammer fell. I ran it anyway, and sure enough, I started seeing lead flakes spitting out the cylinder gap. That was my sign the gun was out of time and still firing out of alignment. In simple terms, revolver timing is about whether the cylinder locks up precisely when the hammer hits full cock or when the trigger reaches the end of its pull in double action. If it's even slightly off, the chamber won't be aligned with the barrel, and you risk shaving lead, damaging your forcing cone, or worse, sending shrapnel sideways. I've watched shooters catch fragments to the support hand just from a revolver being out of time by a fraction. Timing issues show up more often in guns that have been shot a lot dry-fired without snap caps or just slammed around. The internal parts that control timing, the hand cylinder stop and ratchet teeth, are small, and if even one of them wears down or gets out of spec, you've got a problem. The test is simple. Cock the hammer slowly and listen. You should hear the cylinder stop and click into place just before the hammer locks back. If it clicks after or doesn't sound consistent, you're looking at a potential timing issue. In double action, it's harder to feel, but any resistance or odd drag in the trigger pull is a red flag. And here's the deal. This isn't something to try and shoot through. Get a gunsmith to look at it. Timing errors won't fix themselves, and continuing to shoot an out-of-time revolver can cause real damage to both the gun and the shooter. Next up, let's talk about one issue that isn't mechanical, but still manages to shut down revolvers when you least expect it, that dreaded internal lock. Cause number 5. Internal lock engagement. Now let's get into one of the most frustrating and controversial revolver failures out there, which of course is internal lock engagement specifically on Smith & Wesson revolvers. If you've ever owned or carried an S&W model with that little keyhole above the cylinder release, you probably already know the debates. Some folks have never had a problem. Others, including myself, have seen that tiny mechanism shut a revolver down completely, sometimes under recoil and without warning. Here's the breakdown. In 2001, Smith & Wesson began including an internal lock system, also known as the Hillary hole, on most of their revolvers as part of a corporate agreement aimed at appeasing political pressures. The system uses a small rotating flag that blocks the hammer when engaged via a special key. Sounds simple and safe in theory. The problem is that the flag can sometimes self-engage during recoil, particularly with lightweight scandium frame models firing high-pressure .357 magnum or .44 magnum loads. What that means in real-world use is this. You fire a shot, and suddenly the hammer won't move. You can't pull the trigger, you can't cock it, you're done. I've personally witnessed a Model 329 PD lockup after 2 rounds of 44 mag during a test session. The internal lock flag had worked itself into the engaged position just enough to block the hammer from moving. We had to manually reset the lock with the key to get the gun functioning again. That's not something you want happening in a defensive scenario. The issue isn't universal, but it is well documented. Several shooters, including professionals, have reported failures involving internal locks on S&W revolvers, especially under heavy recoil. The models most commonly affected include the 340 PD 360, 329 PD, and 325. Though theoretically any S&W revolver with the internal lock could be vulnerable, many owners choose to either disable the lock or only carry Smiths made before 2001 which don't have the feature. Others simply avoid ultralight models for magnum use. S&W has never officially recalled the system, but they have acknowledged the issue internally, and some newer models, like the Performance Center variants, now come without it. The bottom line is that if you know your revolver has an internal lock test, it thoroughly under real recoil, and if you're trusting your life to that gun, make sure it won't shut itself off mid-fight. But of course, I want to seal this one up with something more human than mechanical. Cause number 6. Operator-induced failures. I've shot revolvers long enough to know that not every malfunction is the gun's fault. In fact, a lot of the time the problem is the person behind the trigger, including me. One of the most frustrating jams I ever had wasn't due to a faulty part or bad ammo. It was because I short-stroked the trigger on my Ruger GP100 during a fast double-action string. I didn't let the trigger fully reset and the cylinder locked up mid-cycle. It felt like the gun broke, but the truth was I was running it wrong. Short-stroking is a common operator-induced failure in double-action revolvers. If you don't let the trigger return all the way forward after each shot, the internal mechanism won't fully reset and the cylinder either won't rotate or it will be half-indexed. It's not a mechanical issue, it's a training issue. And it happens more often than folks like to admit, especially under stress or speed drills. Another classic mistake is snapping the cylinder shut with a flick of the wrist. You see it in movies all the time, but it's a great way to bend the crane or knock the cylinder out of alignment. I used to think it looked slick until I watched someone bend the yoke on a Smith & Wesson 686 during a reload drill. It took a gunsmith to fix, and the guy didn't even realize he'd done anything wrong. Neglecting maintenance is another big one. Revolvers don't need to be babied, but they're not immune to carbon buildup or grime in the wrong places. I've had a snub nose bind up because the lint from the pocket is mixed with unburnt powder under the extractor star. A quick cleaning fixed it, but it was a hard reminder that reliability doesn't mean neglect-proof. Even simple things like over-tightening the side plate screws can cause internal drag. On older Smiths, especially, tightening them unevenly or too aggressively can bind up the trigger or hammer. I've done it myself while swapping grips, and suddenly the gun felt like it had sand in the action. The thing is, revolvers are rock solid if you respect how they work. They've earned their reputation over decades for being tough, simple, and dependable, and for the most part that reputation holds up. But that doesn't mean they're foolproof. The more I've worked with different models, everything from budget Taurus wheel guns to high-end performance center Smiths, the more I've realized that even the best-built revolver can fail if you don't treat it right. The good news: most of these operator-induced issues are absolutely 100% preventable. Learn the full double-action trigger pull and practice proper reset. Don't baby the gun, but don't abuse it either. Clean under the ejector star. Inspect your ammo. Close the cylinder properly, never with a wrist flick, and don't force anything if it doesn't feel right. These little habits go a long way in keeping your revolver ready for the next range trip, the next hunt, or the moment you actually need it to save your life. And when in doubt, just have a damn qualified gunsmith inspect it. Timing issues and shake loose screws. These things creep in slowly, and if you shoot your revolver regularly, they're bound to show up eventually.